Hello everyone. Today we are going to be looking at Devil May Cry 5, the long-awaited sequel to DMC4. It came out 11 years ago. We will be trying to help you answer one very important question. Should you buy this installment to the series? Start us off, we're going to be looking at graphics. The graphics here are fantastic. The areas you spend your time in are all very depressing looking while still having a bit of a fantasy lean to them. Whether that be the ruined cities that have tree roots just sprouting from them, or whether that is actually climbing the tree. It all looks amazing. The detail in each area is great. The only problem with these is that in this game you suffer from repetition a lot more than in previous entries. So while all the areas look really good, you'll be playing a lot of them back to back and they get stale very quick. The design that went into the weapons is great. You can really, just from look alone, see immense detail in just quick glances to the weapons, and further inspection just shows off even more. There's a lot of love that went into the weapon design here. Same with the design of most of the characters. There's a couple that I felt fell flat, mainly side characters who just kind of show up more often, but especially with the main three that you'll be playing, and with like Lady and Trish, all of them look really good. Their character designs are great. So for performance, I was playing this on a 1050, and I was able to play at 920 by 1080p with a pretty consistent 60 FPS on high settings, and was able to maintain a fairly stable 60 FPS on ultra, but it did dip quite more frequently. So if you have a more mid to low tier PC and you want to try playing this, I definitely suggest you stick to high or medium. However, if you have a 1080 or higher, you definitely can play this on ultra settings with no problems. The game has a pretty extensive sweep of settings to play with. You have everything from resolution scaling to texture filtering quality, effects quality, and so on and so forth. You just have a lot of options to play with that really help to make you feel like you have a unique experience with in terms of how your game looks, which is really nice to see. You don't always see very extensive options menus, and it's nice that this one has a pretty decent one. Something else that I really like is the control scheme changes that you can do for all three characters, so that you're not stuck with one control scheme that you're just kind of bracketed into playing with, and you can experiment with what you feel best, and you can customize each one individually so that each one always has its unique control scheme layout. Most notably, where I find this to be really nice is on controller, where V is really significantly harder to play, being that his two attacks are on Y and X and kind of awkward to hit. And you can just map those to RT, LT if you want, and then double trigger and auto attack onto your buttons, so that it's a bit easier to actually play V than it would be normally, but still have Dante and Nero set up in ways that you might prefer. It's a kind of a small thing, but it's really nice for just having the option to be able to play the characters in the best way possible without ruining the control scheme for other characters. The only visual issue I had with the game that stood out was there's a broken glass motif going on in this that you'll see throughout the game, on the top right and around in the menus and stuff, and the ones around your top, or on the top left rather, and those on the screen when you're fighting are really distracting and just makes the game feel not great. So I'd like to see that broken glass motif taken out. It wasn't a game breaker by any means, but it was very distracting, and I found myself hating it more often than liking it. Next we have voice, sound, and music. The sounds here are all implemented really well. Monsters are easy to distinguish from audio cues, which is very important when you're fighting stuff and something's off screen ready to try and kill you. The weapons all sound amazing to use. They all carry the appropriate impact. The sound of the guns is phenomenal. Really just feels cathartic to use the weapons in here just from the sound design alone. The only exception to this, however, is the character that you'll be playing called V, who for his combat does not have any audio cues for the most part whatsoever. So trying to combo with him off of audio feedback alone is a little difficult, and you'll mainly have to use visuals to combo with him. So I would like to see audio of some sort added to his Panther so you can kind of hear better what you're doing outside of just things colliding. The bird talks to you. So the bird has some audio feedback that helps a lot. The Panther doesn't, and it would be nice if they added some audio feedback for the Panther so you kind of knew what was going on. For example, the charge attack on both, the bird says something right as his is charged, the Panther doesn't. So the only way to know that the Panther's charge attack is ready is to be looking, so you can't be trying to run away and charge that, and it would be nice if they added a audio cue. Voice acting here is a mixed bag for me. For about every character that I liked, there were two that I didn't. I really didn't like Nico's voice actor. I think her voice actor did a terrible job. I also didn't care for the accent that they gave that character. Nothing about that voice design for her was pleasing for me. Same with V. I didn't care for his either. And then on top of not liking his voice actor, his dialogue was just bland. So now on the other side of that, we have the music, and the music is fantastic here. The downtime music is nice and relaxing. The battle music is a really nice rhythmed music, and it helps keep you like invested in the fights just with this constant really nice beat. And then boss battle music is epic, and it gets your blood racing, gets the adrenaline pumping. The music here is fantastic, which is not new for this series. They've always been really good at designing encounter music and just the music for the game in general, so it's really nice that we have these great scores to help sell these battles to you while you're playing. Alright, so next up we have gameplay and story. The game takes place a decent time, it seems, after the events of DMC4. If they said an exact time between the two, I didn't catch it in either of my 3 playthroughs. And it begins with a group of people who are standing at this structure in a state of panic, with a guy narrating that he's never known Dante to struggle this much. So we then transition into just missions piggybacking off of other characters leading up to that point, and then continuing off of that point as you play. And throughout the game, you'll be playing as either V, Dante, or Nero. And going back to the visual issue that we talked about earlier, this is where a lot of the problem with this game comes in, because as everyone knows, there's always been a bit of repetition in the DMC series, where you go through a sweep of zones and then you come back through them as a character later. But in this game, you'll go through a zone, clear it, have to go through that same zone as another character, and you'll sometimes do that 2 or 3 times in a row. It's very rare that you have a one-off zone that you never go through again with another character. So for the most part, you're going to be seeing the same zone back to back 2 or 3 times in a row, and it gets really dull and repetitive really fast. So yeah, you end up with a story that just feels repetitive and boring and doesn't feel very fun to actually sit through. Thankfully, the gameplay picks up this slack to a T. There's one major issue with the gameplay that I have that we'll get to when we get a little bit later into this, but the combos all feel fantastic. Nothing's too hard to pick up. You have the Void now, which is a great place to go and just practice your skills. It's really nice to just go in there and practice combos, practice swapping, practicing everything that you'll need to have the best possible combat experience that you could possibly have. So with Dante, you have the kind of more generic, DMC that we've always had to combat. He has the style switches, which feel really good. All of his weapons are things that we've seen before, with one exception on the gun and the sword for him. You have Rebellion, the shotgun, Ebony and Ivory, Balrog, and just some of the more consistent weapons that we've seen throughout the series. He then gets a motorcycle and a hat called Dr. Faust, which are both very unique to the series and both very fun to use. So yeah, you'll find Dante to be pretty standard for the series, but in a more loving and nostalgic way than irritating and smothering, which is good. Then we have V, who is, for me, my favorite part of this game. He can be a little difficult to learn at first, but he brings a nice, fresh look to the hack and slash combo system that we've been playing with, where you're fighting with two creatures that are not connected to you. So you're more incentivized on moving around the field and not getting hit than anything else. And his pets can't kill things, so he has to get into the fray to execute things, which adds a nice method of field control when you just leave some of these monsters in their dying state before they res, and you can kind of use that to have an extra bit of teleportation around the battlefield, which is really nice to have. It could be a little jarring to learn him at first, but one of the most exciting parts of this game, because it's a whole new look on the mechanics that we've seen so far. You have to balance keeping yourself alive, your two pets alive, and when your pets die, you are vulnerable. You can't jump anymore. You can't sidestep anymore. You are completely exposed if either of these two things die, and it leaves a huge impact on your character when one goes down. And I feel like he is really well designed, except for I would like to see some immunity frames either on the start or the end of his execution ability. Not for the whole thing, just for specific times, because there's some enemies that will randomly track hit you. So I'd like to see that, but that's pretty much my only complaint that I've had with V in 30 playthroughs of this game. Unfortunately, we now need to talk about the other side of this with Nero, who I feel is the absolute worst part of this game. I at no point had fun actually playing as Nero. He has all of the bog standardness of Dante without any of the uniqueness. I heard places that the designers didn't want to let Nero swap his Devil Breaker arm because it would feel too much like playing as Dante. But the main problem that I guess nobody wanted to tell them is that it doesn't feel good to actually play with those Devil Breakers when you can't swap them. You're stuck in this weird area where instead of trying multiple Devil Breakers, you just run one set of them so that you aren't trying to fight for the one you want specifically. Because especially on your first run through, you don't know when bosses are going to be coming up. You don't know when major fights are going to be coming up. So you might say be running Gerber and Punchline to run through mobs, and then have two heavy hitting things for a boss. But your first run through, you're not going to know when you need to save those for, when you need to hold on to them. And if you hold on to them too much and you get into the fight with them, you just are sitting there breaking two arms, and it's flow breaking. It's not fun. They need to implement on the fly arm switching for Nero. Yes, it'll feel a little bit like Dante. However, we kind of need it to, because as I said, Dante is fun, Nero is not. And the main difference is you can switch styles on Dante and you can't on Nero. And while I understand them not wanting them to feel exactly the same, there's a difference between them feeling different and them feeling good, and Nero feels terrible to play because you are heavily restricted on this arm mechanic that if you could switch it on the fly, it would be absolutely amazing because the arms are actually really fun to use. But you just get to this downed point where you're just ignoring the mechanic for the most part, and you're just, like I said, running a arm. So for the most part, my entire run through for the latter half of the first run through I was only running the Jabera arm or the Overture arm because I didn't feel like having to finagle this mechanic to work in my favor whenever I was doing a mission with him, which felt really crappy. It got a little bit better in future playthroughs, but the fact that you still can't just on the fly switch, even knowing about how long levels take at this point, it just feels crappy to essentially just use this up until this point and then break the arm. I mean, it doesn't fix the problem. It just makes the problem happen more often in smaller chunks instead of for long periods of the game. The one nice thing about Nero is that he gets a devil trigger after you beat the game, so you can start to rely on that after you beat the game. And honestly, I find myself more often than not just using devil trigger on him instead of actually using my arm mechanics, because devil trigger is consistent and I don't have to. And it's crazy to me because on controller, you have this beautiful D-pad that could have been, an easy swap function, and instead the entire D-pad is used for his devil trigger, and it's like nothing about this to me makes a lick of sense in the context of a fun character. Like, you shouldn't undermine your character's design just because you're afraid he might feel too much like another character. He unfortunately is a huge sticking point for me, and almost makes me not want to recommend the game to people off of his design alone. So starting out on here, we have two difficulty settings, Human and Devil Hunter. I found both of them very lacking. Devil Hunter was way too easy. Human was a joke. So you're really not gonna get anything out of either of these. I almost feel like they should just have Devil Hunter be the base for new players, because Human is not gonna set them up for later difficulties at all, and Devil Hunter's just not difficult whatsoever. Son of Sparta is a nice step up. It introduces a lot of the late game monsters into the early game mobs, which helps raise that difficulty up a bit, but the fight still felt kind of toothless. I don't know necessarily why they did this, but it just feels like these early difficulties just aren't as difficult as they used to be, and that could be a transition. That could be them trying to transition into a more casual friendly game. So for DMC vets, you're not gonna find much of a challenge here, which is unfortunate. But for new players, I mean, it might be enough of a curve for new players still find each one challenging. I have found all the difficulties up to Son of Sparta so far to be kind of blasé. I haven't gotten to Hell or Hell yet. I plan to try and get that knocked out here soon, and hopefully that is still pleasantly difficult enough. So throughout the game, we have 20 missions. We still have a pretty healthy sprinkle of secrets in each mission, and a good variety of hidden missions that are pretty easy to miss, which I was happy about. Some areas that I was kind of rushing through, I never even noticed, like the door for them, and ones that I was specifically looking for them, sometimes I had to look pretty hard for them. Some, of course, were unbelievably easy, but they were pretty well hidden, and I enjoyed that. The enemy diversity here isn't great in terms of the amount of things that you have to fight, but the team does do a good job of making each fight feel very distinct from each other in the moment. So it's nice to have the nice mix of monsters in any given combat scenario. So you never get too exposed to any one enemy type except for like baseline mobs, which are kind of just everywhere. but for the most part, more special mobs are used pretty sparingly and in good combinations with each other. So it keeps it fresh enough to where you don't really feel the lack of enemy diversity throughout the entirety of the game. So something else that I want to touch on before we wrap this up, there is multiplayer on here. There were times where I was having connection loading problems. I don't know entirely how the multiplayer works even after 3 run-throughs. As far as I can tell, when you're doing a mission that has you getting to somebody else in the game, so say you're Nero running to Dante or V running to Nero and Dante, the game will have other people playing those campaigns as those characters in your game with you simultaneously. I don't know what the net value of that is. I don't know why that's a thing. I don't know if that was just something interesting they wanted to try, but it's really jarring to be by yourself just playing your game, finish, and then have to rate another player that you've never seen. In my 3 run-throughs, I've seen the person that I was playing with 2 or 3 times, maybe 4. I honestly wasn't keeping that much of an eye on it. But yeah, you just run into these weird scenarios where at the end of a run, you are asked to rate people that you've most likely never seen. So it's such a useless mechanic for how many times that I had to wait for the network connection to happen, that it was absolutely not worth the design choice to do that. And it was silly to me. I don't know why it's a thing. And it's frustrating because I wouldn't have minded a multiplayer for this game at all. I actually think it would have been fun to have, V and Nero playing together, or V and Dante or Nero and Dante. I think it would have been a really nice addition to the game if they had just let you, do co-op missions that just, maybe had, maybe you could start the game at that point in a souped up version of Son of Sparta where some more diversity is put into each fight with a bit more monsters and some harder things come in even earlier. Something like that would have been really neat. But the way they did it just kind of hinders the game for what it is, for how much effort it can sometimes take for loading to get you in there because of the network connection issues. I didn't try playing the game offline, so I don't even know if you can. If you can't, that is a huge, huge issue, and they should take it out. So to wrap all this up and put a nice little bow on it, I have a lot of concerns and issues with the MC5. There's some really bizarre design decisions to me that I just dislike as a whole. However, the good parts here far outshined the bad to me. So I'm going to recommend that you purchase this game. Despite a lot of my misgivings about it, I still had a lot of fun playing. I don't regret the time I spent in this game. It was just a really fun time. I hope that this video was insightful, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching. Peace.